All right, I'm here with Jogo. Hello.
Hey, hello, Chris.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jogo Guerreiro. I'm from Brazil. I'm working in the industry for the last 10 years. As I started as a 3D generalist and was migrating towards VFX. And I founded my own company, CG Imagine, 3 years ago. And we are working on that mostly for TV series.
Excellent. What are you going to be talking about today?
I'm going to be talking how to optimize scenes, how to work effective with a small crew, and to add a lot of value to the shots without putting a lot of time to the shots. So it's a lot of small tricks that you can add value and work fast and iterate fast and without the need of a lot of people and a lot of things going on.
Excellent. Well, let's jump in.
Yes. Let's get started. Let me give you a quick intro to myself. I've been working with 3D for 11 years now. My background is I'm a CG generalist. I worked for many years in Deep Blue Films, taking care of all the CG work. With time, VFX became a bigger part of my workflow and increased demand. And in the last 3 years, I founded CG Imagine. We are a small VFX house here in Brazil. And here in a small team, everybody needs to cook and clean up the dishes, if you know what I mean. So let me play a little reel from our works from the last year and this year. We used to work mainly in commercials and music video clips, but now most of our jobs are for TV series, and that's an incredibly increasing market for VFX. Even the simplest TV series has some sort of VFX. But my intro into this world was from the back door, and I couldn't even say that maybe not the most ethical one. Let me explain why. 20 years ago, I started doing expeditions, hardcore ones. I'm in the Guinness World Records for the longest windsurf journey, 8,000 kilometers. So 5 years ago, I did 2 other really hard expeditions. I walked across Greenland, coast to coast. And I also did 106 kilometers of open ocean crossing in a stand-up paddleboard. No boat again, sleeping on the board for one night. Between islands in Indonesia. So let me show you a little clip of these expeditions. These were for a TV series named Survival Days. I had also directed and filmed it myself, and why not edit as well. So this series I won as the best director, and it was the best reality TV series at Venice TV Award in 2020. So I was really happy to get that. Don't worry, we'll get to the VFX part. The thing is that these journeys were very hardcore, and pretty often we faced some technical issues like battery discharged, fog in the lens. So when I got back and started putting together the episodes, I started to miss a few key shots like the sun trajectory in Greenland. I couldn't leave my camera running for 12 or 24 hours time lapse. So in Indonesia, when I tried to fly the drone, for some reason, because of the humidity, we have a lot of fog in the lens and most of the shots was totally unusable. And then come the thing that there was no budget for VFX on this, and actually that was a TV series, a reality TV series. So VFX was not even something legal. But I was already working with VFX as my main source of income when not walking in the snow. So I decided to go for it and created a few shots, 100% CG using Houdini. Then was the dilemma of telling that to the TV channel or keeping to myself and hoping they wouldn't notice the fake shots among the reality ones. So I sent the episodes and they approved. But I wasn't feeling very good about that, and I decided to tell them before it went on air for millions of people. So then life showed its magical ways. The directors of the channel got impressed and they asked if I could help them in another project about some indigenous tribes in Brazil. And it was a big project for me because it was composed of 21 VFX shots. We didn't have a lot of time and very short crew.
Nas profundezas do Pantanal, existe povo que tem a remada em pé como tradição.
Vamos fazer o que para mostrar que nós existimos?
Guató, uma remada no tempo. Sexta-feira, às 9h30 da noite, no Off.
I love to teach and to share knowledge. Learning Houdini was another dimension for my mental adventures. When I started in VFX and I started with 3D in general, it was another way of exploring the world with amazing characters in spectacular worlds, and that was so intriguing to me, and that was my main fuel to keep learning and improving my skills until it became a real job. So and this journey of learning Houdini is still going and going, always learning new things. I'm always following tutorials, I'm buying courses, I'm always trying to improve myself. And sometimes people teach you not something new in regarding of accomplishment something, but in the way that you can accomplish that. And if you can learn another way to accomplish something that requires less time, be more efficient, then it's always a positive thing. So the way I like to teach is to show the tools available to make the decisions, because there is so many paths to accomplish everything in Houdini or CG in general. Your skills, your hardware, the time that you have for that project, the camera position, all that needs to be considered before choosing which one to go. So let's dive in a few examples. And the first one I want to talk is the drone replacement shot. So we're going to understand a bit how much effort you really need to place on each stage of a project and the importance of Houdini's HDA system. So let me give a play in a pre-recorded session. I will start by covering the process of creating the shot for the TV show. This is not exactly the one that I used. I don't have the files anymore, so I'm recreating it using Houdini 18.5. So I'm just bringing some really rough lines that I did in Illustrator. And if you use a grid and use a UV project and a quick shade, and you need to keep the same proportions, you're able to set like some guides, like some background. And then you use it in another object node, so it get like a transparency for free, like a translucent. And you can just model. There is so many ways of doing it. We can use like a loft, doing some lines. I will do the loft when I do the camping tent for the snow shot. But for this one, I just grab a cube and just move a bit the lines, the points. I work in the half and then mirrored, so and then did the subdivide. And I like to place myself the seams for the UV flatten, so I was sure where I wanted to how to texture it, and it's something. All this process took like maybe 30 minutes or something like that. It was really fast, and that's the point here, is to understand like for this shot, because it was a TV show, it couldn't look like a fake shot. So I knew already that I was need to shot from some distance. So I couldn't go that close. Otherwise, I would need to put a lot of time into this to make it really real. I always like to keep the poly count low, that you can UV easily. And for the backpack, I went through a different process using Vellum. When you have this shape, the thing that you are concerned from the distance is how the light is going to interact with your object. So in the case of the bag, it's really important that you have like this kind of organic form, because you can see from the light, if it's just like a block, you would notice even from the distance. So I'm going to use a Vellum, and also using the Vellum brush, you can just quickly model and give like this natural look for this. I used to do a lot of things that I used to do like in Marvelous Designer, for example. I'm migrating for Houdini, a lot of cloth simulations, all that I'm doing inside Houdini, and it's so good to do inside one. If you can do it in one software, it's really good. So I'm doing a lot of that in Houdini, and even characters. I'm migrating after the KineFX. I'm migrating my characters to build it inside Houdini. So here's the result from the distance. I think it's good enough, and when you say that, you can move on to the next shot, and then you refine later. I want to cover a little tool that I created, because that's the power of Houdini. Every time you have a task that you do many times, or if you're creating something that you know that you're going to use many times, it's really worth spending more time to set a tool for that. So you have like all the parameters in here. And I created this because I render the oceans in Redshift. Redshift is my main render engine. So the Redshift renders ocean differently than Mantra, because you just export some displacement maps and then you displace in the render time. So what I did, I created this tool, and this has a few parameters like the ocean sides, and the ocean ground is just another plane under it that I can control how far it is from the other one, and it's just visible in the secondary rays, so only through refraction and reflection. So it's just there to be able to give some color to the ocean, and you can control the color and the patches in here. So here's the displacement maps itself that I'm going to show you what I did. So it's 5 displacement maps all blended together. So we have like 2 large ones, 2 small ones, and so on. So let me go into the large mask, for example, and let's visualize it in the color. Let me just visualize. Yeah, here you can see the colors. So the white one is one displacement map, and the black one is another one. So you don't have like the repetition. That's why we have this. And the same thing goes for the medium maps. And the small one is the very tiny details that is just small ripples with very high resolution all over this. So, and this is just a grid where we have like more resolution just to see the displacement. And we're going to cover that when I set up the scene with the boards in there. So let me show you how I cook them. So it's basically 5 different maps, and we export the texture itself on each of them. So we save the frame range that we want, and the big ones we have like a 10 resolution exponent, and for the small one is 12. It's very high res. So every step in here it's exponential. So just be aware that if you increase this more than 12, it's really high resolution. And the grid size is also being defined the size of the patches. So here we have a grid size of 125. The middle one is 200, and I believe it's 500 for the big one. So then you just cook this, and then you import in the tool. But you can mix that with flip simulations. You can mix that with to give movement to anything that's floating in the water, and I'm going to show you how. So I like to separate the nodes that I'm going to render. So inside another node, I'm going to bring the board itself and the bags all together. And I like also to work with my desktop divided in two, so I can just drag from the object merge. And then what I need to bring is the ocean, the tool that I just covered. So I just bring the tool. I'm going to start with a 2000 meters map, and then I bring all the maps, the .exr maps that I cooked. And once you cook this, even if you have a generic look, you can play with these multipliers, the wave sharp height. So that's just a way of making the sea more rough or more calm. And let me show you. Okay, so that's the render, and of course I have like I can change the parameters on the texturing straight on the tool, and we already have like a very realistic ocean. So let me compare to you the different small waves, what it makes the difference. Like this is 0.25 here, a small wave 0.25. So if I increase it to 1, let's see how sharp it becomes. You can see that the difference is incredible. Look, it adds a lot of details, but then you have the feeling of wind. So here's the deal. Now if we allow the editing of content of the tool here, we can dive inside. And then if we go to the ocean grid masks, we have the main one, that is the big one that's totally flat, and it's just for saving the masks. And this one is just to visualize the displacement itself. So it's a smaller grid. I can make it like even smaller for us to visualize, like 100 by 100. And let me just, yeah, we can go even more in here so we can see more details if we want, like that. And then if we visualize this, you're going to see the displacement itself. And of course, it's not the same resolution as we would have with tessellation in the render time, but you can see the movement of the wave. And that's what we're looking for. And the thing is that this one, if we come to this VOP, what we are doing, we are bringing the maps, the displacement maps in here, and this is the multiplier that we are multiplying for the size of that, and we are extracting with a vector to float the UVs to U and V in the color map, and we are mixing them both using the mask, the black and white image that we had, and this is the same one of the ocean. Of course, all these should be the same, and then we are adding all that to the position, and that's going to displace it. So with that said, these masks are the same one as this one, okay? And then we get this in the end. And this should match the same thing of the displacement. And we can double check that. So for that, we need to move our board first to visualize, but then we need to find a way of having this natural movement on this board. And I'm going to show you how in a bit. So you see here, I just placed the board on the surface and just trying to match if the waves are looking the same. And you can see that it's matching, like the amount of part, a little bit of water in the back, and you can see also in my viewport and in the render. So it's just matching, it's just double checking. So now let's start to give the movement to the board so it matches the ocean. This technique I follow Rohan Dalvi in his YouTube channel. He had a tutorial, I think 1 year ago, something like that. And it was a very simple way of just following the same movement of the ocean. So for my grid, it's a bit different, but what we do, we place a sort node in there. So then with the sort node, we can pick a point in space, but it should be before the displacement. So we pick in the grid. And the thing is that we can place a null out after the large displacement. So then we're going to get that grid with that point sorted, and we have like the 0, for example, close to the tail of the board. But you can pick any number there and place the board wherever you want in the grid. It's a good way of selecting it. So I'm just going to bring the grid itself. And then it's a low resolution because we don't need a lot of resolution. Actually, we need less. We're going to even do a smooth because we don't want these very tiny movements in the board. We want the general wave, the swell being moving the board. So we can just compute the normals. So now let's group and let's select that the board 1. And for that, we can just choose the group and let's say 0, for example. So we're grabbing the point 0. And that point is going to keep the same position, always following. So you see the waves and the wave there is just following the correct position. If we do a copy to points in here, the board is going to come in a weird way, like, so let me just, we need to select the group because we want to copy just to that point specifically, but it's vertical, you see. We need to do something else. We need to set the up vector. And it's a very simple expression. So we're going to set the up vector to 1 in the y-axis. So 0x, 1y, and 0z. So I'm going to set that the normal is going to be the cross of the up and the side vector. But then it's going to be in the wrong direction. So I'm also going to say that the normal is going to multiply itself. If you do the multiply before the equal, it's to -1. So we are inverting it. And now the board should follow the correct position. That's really good. So let's see the ocean. It's very high now, but then it's about just placing a transform and place whatever you want it to be. But it's really effective way if you don't want any simulation. In our case, I just wanted the board from the distance. It's not even going to, I didn't even need to do a flip simulation for that. So I just wanted to have this movement in the board. And you can move this point along, and if it's a boat or something like that, it's also an effective technique. But if you want the boat to react to the waves, you do in another way using RBG or other methods. Imagine a little noise on top of that. So the board is going to have like an extra movement, because if someone is on top of that, maybe you're out of balance, maybe there's a small ripple going. It's not like just to break up a bit. I made a quick animation for this. I used a software called Character Creator for that. It's not my main software. If I want to go really close from characters, I go in the traditional workflow using ZBrush. And in the end of last year, we start to rig everything inside Houdini as well. If you have a look in here, and that's the goal of that, is from a distance, I wanted to give some movement. So if you see just like a tiny bit of movement, someone just like pointing out, like if we would be talking and there would be like two guys, same thing. And then I use this plugin from a guy, let me see if I can, yeah, I don't know the name, his name, I think he's Russian, yeah, he's from Russia, and it's Material Extractor HDA, and it's a $3, and it's amazing tool that just optimize when you bring an FBF file, and then you just add this Material Extractor, and you can choose between Redshift and Principal Shader in Mantra, and it just plays a material network and extract all the materials from that character. So I brought the other guy inside and I placed him in the board. Then what I did is just pick a different point to copy to point, you know, like we can grab anything like 517 and the board's going to be in that place and it's going to follow along the ocean the same way. So it's really good, and let's have a check in the render. See, it's a bit too close, but look, it's so good, and the whole thing, the whole process, including the animation of the guys and texturing and everything, it's less than 4 hours, the whole thing. So yeah, you say look to this that close, it's really bad, right? But then from the distance, that's the key of this all this lecture that I'm talking here. It's all about this, to understand what do you need for that project. And in this case, I'm redoing a shot that I did before, so it's even faster. So it's all about how close you can get being kind of sloppy in the setup of the scene. If you want to go really close, if you want to do this for real, then it's going to be a lot of work. Like it's a exponential, I would say exponential amount of work. It's not just linear, you know, like from this distance, you spend like 2-3 hours. If you go like maybe 10 meters closer, you spend like days or even weeks. So just keep that in mind, but it's really fun to do that. And I'm going to show you the render. So here is connected with the real clips. The one that I did for TV is a bit different than this one, but yeah, you see one day, if I put like 1 week, that's a reasonable time, you can bring it really close to reality. So powerful tools, think smart, and don't waste time doing things that's not going to be visible. Let's approach our second shot, and it's the Greenland time-lapse. I couldn't do long time-lapses in Greenland, and I wanted to show the trajectory of the sun throughout the day. We're going to do some simple modeling techniques in Houdini. We're going to cover a bit of the height field system, and we're going to do some scene optimization. So here is the reference of the tents that we used in our expedition and the snow itself. So the tent is pretty simple, but we need to follow along a few things so we make it believable from some distance. So I'm going to start modeling this, and I'm going to start with a simple shape as well. For this time, I think the cube is the best one to go. That's an easy choice. So I'm going to bring down a tube, and I'm going to use in the z-axis, and the measurements, I'm just going to be some approximate. I'm not doing something really to scale. Like it's to scale, but it's not in the centimeters range. It might differ. So around like 4 meters, I would say, is the length. And if you change this, you're going to change the extremities. So I'm going to do just a generic change to, now I need to reduce that 115 and 4 meters in length. And the amount of divisions that we have in that, it's something that we need to check, because I want to have the same amount of subdivisions of the supports. Like we have 4 supports there. I'm going to place it 4. Great. And the thing is that I always like to work as minimum polygons as possible in the beginning, as much as you can. And if you go all the way to the end with very few polygons, that's great. Easier to set up the UVs, easier for handling, very light for it to render. So it's really good. But of course, sometimes you just can't go that low poly, So I'm going to use a poly bridge to make the full circle. So if you select the edges and in the destination group, the other one, we could do it procedurally as well, but I'm just iterating fast. And the thing with doing procedural work is that saves you time if you're going to reuse that again, or if you want to make changes and the whole chain is going to react to that. But sometimes if you have something specific in your mind and you just want to do it really fast, of course it's faster sometimes to just do like this non-procedural modeling. So what I'm doing now, I'm grouping that edge, the bottom edge, because I'm going to use these labs to add to, it's called like, it's a labs tool that's called, let me just recap, I think it's group, edge group to curve. Yeah. So what it does, it creates, like if you have a group in the edge, it creates a curve from that. And I'm transforming it to the front. So in the positive Z, around a meter, maybe we need more. I'm just going to merge just to visualize, but we're not going to use the merge. So yeah, around a meter. What we're going to do, we're going to ray that, the top part to the bottom one, and we're going to have like the close part of our tent down. So I'm going to do another group, and I'm just going to select the points. So we have like 5 points selected. Let's call front top, and we need to have the same amount of points. We have already 5 points there because it's just what we had in the bottom. So then it's going to work well for us. We need to ray, and we need to get like the front top, and the collision is just the minimum distance. But for that to work, we need to create a poly loop. Otherwise, it's going to just bring all that points, and we want that point to keep in the same position as they are. Just create a poly loop, and then the group itself, we need to double check, place the group afterwards, and the selection is working. So perfect. We did a nice way. And now if we move the translation, the transformation there, we just change the shape. And to close that, we can use just another poly bridge. Now I want to prepare the poles. So we need to select the loops and do a poly bevel to just extract the thickness. And yeah, if we set the group, we can do another one. This time we select the ones that we did before. And you see, sometimes it's just hard to select the edges like this, for example. It's very tiny. And because it's procedural, what we can do, we can just go ahead and increase the size so we can select very easy. And then we can always come back and just, we're not changing the poly count, so we can just change again the size, and the selection is going to be there. So it's just easier way to work. I'm going to use a pick to extract, but I didn't like the connection there in the bottom, so I thought maybe the poly extrude would be a better solution for us. So yeah, it didn't quite work, the peak. What the peak does, it just push points towards the normal of each point, but it worked really well with the poly extrude in that case. So yeah, perfect. I add some divisions, and I didn't do any subdivision yet. We will do that later to see how the tent's going to look, but we need to do other creases, like some edges, to do like some poly loops around some edges. So I'm going to use the knife to cut down the whole bottom of the tent itself. And now if I subdivide, it has a great shape, and the poly count is low and it's working perfect. We're going to work now in the ventilation of our tent. So just selecting a few polygons in the front, in the back, wherever is the front and the back is symmetrical. And now let's poly extrude. And if you can change the front of the extrusion to give a different shape. Next, if you make a polygon selection of those points, you can use a fuse only on those groups and fuse them together so the shape get this like similar to what we have in our reference. Then I'm going to select a few edges to make for the UVs. I want specific edges because I want to separate based on the texture that I'm going to apply on each of those. We could use the Outlabs UV, it's a great tool, but sometimes when you model something like very low poly like I did and with a very clean topology, it's so easy to select the edges that you want to extract for the UVs that just worth spending like 2-3 minutes doing that. So it's a great way. Deselecting this loop that we don't need. We can have the whole bottom at once, and great, we have nice UVs. So if you use a UV layout, it's going to place everything, very clean UVs as well. Let's place the normal. Now I have the low poly with the UVs. I want to generate a higher poly, and we're going to apply the same technique that we did with the bags. So we can use the Vellum to just give that organic shape to the tent, to give the feeling of that's not a rigid thing, you know. So I'm remeshing it first. Then I decided to go with voxel mesh and increase a bit the dilate a bit, gain a bit of more volume to that, and then we can remesh this. I was kind of trying to figure out the best approach for that. So if the voxel mesh helped anything, and then it didn't. So the remesh worked well. Then the Vellum constraint, just changing a few parameters. So I don't want it to be very stiff, and I want to enable plasticity on that. So basically it. And then we use the brush and just play a bit and then tweak. There was a viewport bug, and you see, yeah, it gives a very good, nice organic shape. And the thing with this shape, even if we're going to see from the distance, is not the details that you're going to see, but the way that the light is going to interact with this object would tell like to the eyes that that's something weird with that, or it's something natural, you know. And because we're going to do a time lapse and the sun is going to change position during this transition of the sun, the light will change, and what that would do is going to even highlight even more this organic shape. So that's really important. And the Vellum brush is a great tool. We don't even need to simulate anything. It's just going to be like just touching here and there until you're satisfied with the shape. So now that I have the shape defined, I want to do a point deform, and to point the form using the high res mesh that we distorted using the Vellum process. But the number of points in the Vellum brush is the same, so we can use those to deform the geometry. And now we have the low poly also deformed in an organic way. So for the lines that sustain that holds the tent, Like I just did a line that would have more or less the same length of the tents, and just kept the points using an add node. So I wanted to make a selection of those points. I tried to think a way of doing it procedurally using like the normals and the height, but in the end I prefer to just use a bounding box. So just select the top part, place the bounding box wherever I wanted, and you can pick a few points. It wouldn't matter because the thing is that we would just use a fuse to connect by proximity. So yeah, you see, if I use a fuse increase, then I get 4 points. The numbering is in the wrong order, so I want to add a sort node, and based on the z-axis, I'm just matching the numbers there so they make sense after the merge, actually, because I want all of them to connect based on the group. So if you do like a group n of n points, you get like these pairs of lines, and that's exactly what we need. Use a sweep node, then we can get the correct thickness for the line in a very simple way. So that was the best way that I found to give the line. And the line also is some small detail, but it's going to be visible in the light. So now with very clean UVs, it was pretty easy to texture the scene. And so I just went to Substance Painter again and tried to capture a lot of small details like the snow on the top of the tent and the different colors to get the color right, and also the logo there. I think it's an important feature for the distance. So here's just a quick render to show you the work, and we're looking very close to the tent and it's looking good, but for the shot we're going to be further away, a bit of backlight, so we're pretty safe. So you can see the reference. We have this very flat area. That's the ice cap of Greenland, and it's completely flat, but you have like this wind swept snow on top. It's kind of in this day, for example, that didn't snow for a few days, very cold. So we have a lot of interesting details that we're not going to accomplish all that just in the height field, but we need to give a good base, and then we do the extra details in the texturing stage with some displacement. So starting by having a 1000 by 1000 grid and using the Wally F1, gives like this kind of geometric shape, but if you place a very low element size and a low amplitude, you give these nice undulations on the whole terrain. And then we can do another one. And just the same idea of the ocean, we're going to displace it a bit different, so it's going to be a bit different than the other one, and then we're going to mix them both using a noise. So then you don't have the repetition, not only in the texture, but in the displacement of the terrain itself. So that's a really easy technique when you are afraid of having it like these repetitions along the whole thing. So the red area is going to have one and the white area is going to have the other one. And if you use the lattice warp, you're going to twist that a bit, the noise. And this gives this wind swept look to the terrain. And here, so use a height field layer and use the noise as the mask. So it's one on top of the other, masked by the noise itself. So also we need to have like a bit of undulation in the terrain. So it's flat, but I want to have like just a bit one. And if you use an alligator noise, give kind of a nice look for that to break up the terrain a bit. And using the gradient warp with a 0.2, you're going to start having these weird shapes, but this looks really good. We can use a distort node and distort it a bit with element size a big one, because we just want to move the whole mass just to tweak a bit, nothing too much. And I'm going to erode just like maybe 8 frames, something like that, just to break up a bit It's not like a totally necessary step for that, because the erosion here is not playing the role of really simulating what happens in the snow in this case. We just wanted to break up a bit the lines, and using the height field clip just to clip the top edges, because it's kind of a plain top around. There's no points in the snow because the wind would just sweep that away. So we want to look to the reference and keep this nice look. And I'm also blurring the terrain a bit. So we have like just these undulations, and they look really great with the low angle. And if you layer on top, adding that on top, and we don't need any mask, we're just adding that on top of the other one. So we have like this kind of a breaking up on the terrain, and that's really great. So resetting the simulation, I want to have a bit more resolution. So we can add, after the layer, we can add just a distort, and because then it's going to create these shapes of the wind that create these lines that have like this nice flow shape along the whole terrain, and it's really cool to have that. So now we need to convert the height field to geometry, and at this point, if you have a lot of resolution, it might start to have like a lot of polygons, like more than 10 million polygons. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a way of optimizing your scene so you have more polygons in the areas that you need and less in the other areas. So I'm just creating an attribute called retention, and this attribute is read by the polyreduce. And you can do it non-procedurally, just painting the areas that you want, use an attribute paint, or the best way to do is use a volume, and then you set to the camera and place your camera there, and then the camera is going to define the volume, and you can use that using an attribute transfer to transfer. No, actually is a attribute from volumes, and you're going to transfer this attribute that we're going to name it retention, and it's going to capture that information from the camera into your geometry of your terrain. So I'm just going to set the name as retention. I'm going to set the value of 1, and then we're going to drag the volume there, and we're going to have this retention. But the thing is that we want to retain in the area close to the camera that the camera is going to be looking at, but we don't want to have like a zero retention in the rest. We want to have at least some. And then we can just do that using a point VOP, and we can blur the retention attribute so we have like a better transition if we want. It wouldn't make a lot of difference, but sometimes it's good to not have a harsh area. And we can do a point VOP to set a minimum retention to everything. So if you bring using a bind node inside your VOP, let me just go in here. Yeah, let's do a bind node, and then you bring retention, and then you can do a fit range and export the retention outside. And the minimum, the destination minimum, we set to 0.3. So now we have the retention, and we have 3 values there. If we change the float to attribute size to be 1, we're going to have only 1 attribute. And we just need a float value from 0.3 to 1 in our case. So then the polyreduce, you have this retain density by attributes. So we have already set the attribute retention there. It's by default retention. So let's say like we want to do 20%. So that red area, it's not going to be affected by that polyreduce. It's going to keep more polygons, and that's great. I created this node texturing, layering different texture in Quixel Mixer using Quixel Bridge assets, and that's going to give us the last definition in our terrain. So for the sleds, I used a different technique to model it. I use a draw curve, and then I use the resample node to just smooth the shape, and use the skin node to bind everything together and to give the geometry to it. So the last tweak for texturing the terrain, you can see that I increased the subdivision, the tessellation, and gave a bit more definition to it. And also these little tiny sparks in the texture. And that's coming from a noise that I'm placing the emission color. A very tiny noise, so 0.66. I animated it because when the sun was too low, we don't want a lot of this emission to play a big role. We want it to be more when the light is touching it. So you see here's the glow. So that's why I animated. So I had like a lot of emission when the sun was higher and no emission when the sun was very low. And that gave just the final touch. Here's the final render. So I built that all in 3 hours, very little time, and gave a decent result. You can improve that if you put more time, but it's really good to be able to accomplish something like that, making smart decisions and do that in a short period of time. That's great. So let's go for a next example. So by last, we're going to cover some environment techniques. That's part of my course, Faraway Island. So we're going to learn how to manipulate the terrain for simulations, combining different large-scale flip simulations in a very optimized way, and integrating simulations with an ocean grid. So let me play a pre-recorded video. I want to start sharing a cool way of digging more the river, so we have a better simulation. So I'm just extracting a plane from the surface and editing it in a way that we can then make like a boolean from the terrain using that plane. And that's going to give not only like a deeper river that you can control how deep you want it to be your collider, and at the same time to give like some texture to it in displacement, like, because if you add a noise to your plane, when you do the boolean, the terrain of course is going to capture that that noise. And that's a really good way of just setting that in the part that you're going to simulate, because you're not going to simulate the whole scene. So you're just focusing one area and doing this Boolean fracture. And it's really great to work like that, because you have control over how much deep you want it to be. Because when you are doing the height field node and you're playing with the nodes, you can't be very precise in every element in your terrain. It's much easier to give the general shape and then going from there. Always keep your eyes on the reference, because in the big waterfall, the white water is more important than the flip sim, but the flip sim is the base. So we can do a basic flip sim and extract the data, the velocity and the vorticity, and we can use that in the shader to help to sell the idea of the white water, the speed that comes, and maybe just the start you can see the water. In a very high res sim, you'd have around 100 million particles in a white water simulation. For this one, I have only 7 million, not 77. It's very few particles. And the thing is that if you have a lot of motion blur and if you do some other pyrosim on top of that, you can live without simulating like a lot of particles. And you can always use a point replicate that's going to just put points around it and use some noise just to give more volume for that. That's not like a high-end production workflow, but it's something that if you need to simulate something fast and you don't have a very strong machine, you can just survive doing that. And you can layer different simulations and just tweak a few parameters and another one and render also like in different passes. And then what I'm doing here, I'm just selecting the areas that we have like a more depth, and I'm using a rasterization because I want the volume to be more in the areas around the base of the waterfall, that it vaporizes more. Let me explain you how to combine different large flip simulations into the scene. So we have this that's going to be our flip tank, where we're going to have like a lot of particles, and we're going to use some waves to move those particles against that wall. So that's one flip sim, and we're going to use a wave force for moving these particles. And then we have the waterfall. The waterfall has a velocity, all these attributes that we already have. The velocity is that is going to interact with the other flip simulation. We're going to use that to distort also and create these ripples around it. And then by last, we have the ocean grid. That is just a displacement. And this displacement should match the flip simulation. And we are going to do that having an area of flat surface before the flip simulation starts. And we're going to displace that exactly the same way that we're going to displace the ocean grid. And with that, we have all the colliders and everything is going to match. So for the ocean flip simulation, we use the ocean spectrum to generate waves. But these waves are different than the one that we use for the displacement of the grids, because these waves are just to generate velocity. When velocity comes in rows, in lines as waves, it's going to give this wave look to our flip simulation. And that waves are going to be moving and simulating, hitting the wall or any colliders that we set. So we need to do that, and we need to set the correct direction, how much sharpness we want, and how much alignment we have. But the visually looking to the spectrum is not the waves that we're going to see there. They're just the forces. So think about the first pass, you just need to generate forces. Every flip sim, they're going to be moved by forces. And these forces can be using like a line that has velocity on this, a body that is falling, any type of velocity. In this case, we're also using the ocean spectrum to generate velocity through waves. But we need to mask a few things because we need to have that flat edge that we're going to be later combining with the ocean grid. So we use a VOP to just have like no velocity in the beginning, and then the velocity will just start after a little bit further down our grid. So here you see that we have the beginning is really flat, no force, but then the velocity of the waves start to going further. Always start with a low particle separation, like 0.1, for example, just to visualize what's going on. So we can take advantage of the attributes that were generated in our waterfall simulation. So the water is falling and it has velocity on it. So like we did with the waves and brought the ocean spectrum waves force, we can also use the velocity of the white water, not the geometry of the white water, not the geometry of the waterfall, but the velocity of the waterfall to displace and to play against the other simulation. So that's how we did this. You just bring the force of the waterfall and it's going to interact. And of course, this is very low res, but you get the idea. And that's a great way. You don't need to simulate everything in once. You do one simulation and then do another one, and to see which elements you can extract from one simulation to interact with the other one. So in this case, what interacts with the ocean is the velocity of the waterfall falling on it. So, and you can multiply the velocity to get like more or less disturbance in the area that you want. So we combined the waterfall with the flip. Now it's about combining the flip with the ocean grid, because you don't want to have a flip simulation covering the whole screen because too much particles. So what we need is that flat part. We need to displace that the same way we displace the whole ocean. And we can use the same HDA that I created that we talked about in the paddle scene. And we extract that data from that and displace the same and place the same displacement on the grid. But we need to mask out the velocity and the vorticity out of that, because we don't want to displace things that are already moving fast, like waves or anything ripples. You don't want to add a displacement on top of that. You want to displace the flat areas that has no velocity. So we don't also need to use both displacement that we have, like the black and white. We can put just the white area around the area that we want, and then we use only one of the displacement to do that. And in comp, we're going to separate that element. We're going to render just the flip sim with the displacement on that and just the grid, and we're going to combine both of them. So we're going to have like a totally seamless transition between the flip simulation and the grid. Matt Puchala created this awesome plugin called Axiom Solver that works pretty fast in Houdini for pyro simulations. And I use his plugin for creating the mist of the connection of the waterfall with the flip simulation, and also the mist around the waterfall. When it's falling really fast, you can see this kind of a smoke going outside of the waterfall. And with Action Solver, it's so fast, and you can create this, and you can iterate really fast. You can try and make a few parameters, change a few parameters, try again and test again and test again. So it's really fast to see the results that you want. And I totally recommend this plugin. It's for free, but please donate if you like to use, because it's such a great tool. And I use that for all the mist around the waterfall. So here you can see that just the mist there. I'm not using the white water, and here is all together. And just keep in mind that this is just a low-res simulation. I just wanted to prove that it's possible to do something in any computer, just doing low-res. If you go for a real work with that, like a professional work, you just up-res all the simulation, and you're going to get, of course, a better result. So this is my course, Faraway Island. It's a Houdini environment complete course, more than 17 hours. So if you're interested in that, I have it for sale in CG Circuit. So, and you're more than welcome to join us there and ask me any question, and I will be more than happy to help you out. Thanks Side Effects for the opportunity to let me share a bit of my work, and thank you for watching this Houdini Hive. See you in the next one.